Ridham Desai is our next guest on the show. And of course, their latest note is out. Managing Director and Chief Equity Strategist, India at Morgan Stanley. Ridham, great to have you on the show. There's so much to talk about: tariffs, budget, capex, consumption. But you know what really caught my eye in that note of yours? That contrary to large pockets of the market, where people are saying go to safety, go to large caps, you are still retaining your bias for small and mid caps, and you still see scope in that side of things. So let's open with that. Why you don't think that mid caps and small caps are flashing red?
Hi, thanks, Subi, and great to be on CNBC. So this has to be contextualized, and we have to bear in mind that the news from outside India is not so good. So keep that aside. We'll come back to that subject a little later in this conversation. But the news from India is going to get a whole lot better in the coming weeks. So we've gone through a mid-cycle soft patch, which has, I think, lasted for about 5 or 6 months. It was rather idiosyncratic, led by extreme weather in August, elections in the first quarter, lack of spending by the government, and a little bit of tightness on the monetary side. So all this has assimilated into a slowdown in growth, which hurts SMIDs the most. And of course, at the starting point, the SMID valuations were looking a little extreme, and that correction has happened. I think we are now getting into a phase where growth will surprise to the upside. The budget reaffirms that. I think this is a growth-oriented budget. In fact, the phrase I've used for this budget is that it's a magic budget, and I'll come to that in a moment. And my expectation is that the monetary policy will back this budget, and the monetary policy will also become growth-oriented. So as far as India is concerned and what we control, I think things are looking up. Of course, as I said at the outset, the caveat is what happens in the rest of the world, and we can come back to that conversation. So that's the reason why I think that after this steep correction, now SMIDs are looking better than they have been for almost 7 or 8 months.
Piece on consumption, really, Ridham. How much will this help in your opinion, and what will see that lift and that help? Which subsectors within consumption, in your opinion?
That's a good question, Prashant. It's not as obvious as it seems. So let's contextualize this. This is about 10 million people, 1 crore people, who are getting this tax break to the extent of 1 lakh crores. And it's not necessary that they will take this tax break and buy soaps from it. Okay. So I think consumer staples is certainly not the place where we go to. Consumer discretionary, I think, is a much better bet. And even there, I think at the higher end of consumer discretionary is where I think you will probably see some of this tax saved being spent. Some of it can actually also come into the stock market. All of it will go to the banking sector. So this is how I would break it up. And that's, the dilemma always with tax cuts. It's hard to predict what people benefiting from a tax cut will do with that money. They could just simply deposit it in the bank, or they could go and buy shares, or they could use it to buy some high-end goods. And I think you'll get a mix of all of that. Now, the exact mix is very hard to predict, but it will be a mix. And all this is actually auguring well for the economy. When you've hit sort of a spending capacity limit and you don't want to do wasteful expenditure, and again, we should highlight this point, and I'll come to this in a second. So just give me a second. When you don't want to do wasteful expenditure, this is the best next alternative you have, which is give it to the people to spend. And that's what the finance minister has done. So kudos to her for that. Now on wasteful expenditure, again, yesterday's newspapers had no mention about this. The subsidy spending of the government has gone back to pre-COVID levels. It's now back to 1% of GDP. And we had achieved a multi-year low in 2019 at 1% of GDP. So it's, I think, 1.07 if I remember correctly. So the wasteful expenditure is, it's almost you're wringing the neck of your spending options. It's like you're tightening your purse strings. And at the same time, you're getting the private sector to increase its participation in the economy. The way I characterize this is that the government, and I think this is common knowledge now, The government did the heavy lifting coming out of COVID because private sentiment was weak. It is now stepping away and reconsolidating the fisc, in a way preparing for the next crisis moment. Because when another crisis moment arrives, if it ever does, you need spending capacity in the government. So you need to be always prepared for it. And now the private sector takes over. This is incredible, actually, if you think it from a stock market perspective. Very few countries in the world have this flexibility which we have, which is we can take the foot off the pedal, consolidate our fisc, and create capacity to address any upheaval that can happen in the coming years. And that is why this budget is magic. I mean, just one of the reasons. I mean, there are plenty of reasons why it's magic, but this is one more reason why it's magic.
Hey, thank you for watching this on CNBC TV18. Hope you liked it. For more such interesting news and updates, follow CNBC TV18 on all the social media platforms.